welcome everybody to this session, the third one of this morning. In this session, we are going to talk about some useful tools to assess and know more about learning assessment systems in place globally. Well, I'm going to take the opportunity maybe to those who maybe don't know me. I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Atilio Pizarro. I'm the coordinator of the Latin American Laboratory for Assessment of the Quality of Education, GESE for its Spanish acronym. I would like to introduce this session talking a little bit about our laboratory, because I think these tools are very important for our work, are useful for our work in the field. I think this gives sense to the existence of these tools. GESE is a network of national level directors of educational assessment, coordinated by UNESCO Santiago. At the moment, GESE has 19 member countries. All we have within our network, all the Spanish-speaking countries plus Brazil. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the National Institute for the Evaluation of Education in Mexico, our host institution, for its hospitality, and also take the opportunity to thank for all its support of our work of GESE since its creation in 1994. I also want to thank UAS for the work they are conducting to monitor the goals of the Educational Agenda 2030, and for the organization of this meeting. Especially, I would like to express on behalf of the Regional Office of Education based in Santiago, UNESCO Santiago in Chile. I express our full commitment with the goals of GAML for this global alliance. It is because of the many challenges of this alliance that I am very pleased to be the chair of this session, during which we will discuss about these useful tools on learning assessment. In this session, we are going to have two presentations and one presenter. Actually, it will be just one block presentation of 45 minutes. Okay. And 25 minutes for questions and answers. We will know more about the work of the partnership between UIS and the Australian Council of Educational Research Centre for Global Education Monitoring, ACER-GEM. In this context, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this session, Ursula Schwantner. Ursula is a researcher fellow of ACER-GEM. Ursula has a long experience as an educational researcher, specializing in large-scale assessment, such as she has been involved in PISA, IEA peers, and teams. First of all, within this session, we will know more about the updates on the Catalogue for Learning Assessment, CLA. Modules 1 and 2. The CLA, previously referred or known as the Observatory of Learning Outcomes. that seeks to map the different assessment the countries use to monitor student achievement. Actually, I know very well this initiative because from GESE, in the first phase of the observatory, we collaborate to gather information from the Latin American countries. The second version of the CLA, of the catalog, is more related to the challenges that impose the Educational Agenda 2030. The presentation will show us about the launch and development of the second version of the catalog and the state of its implementation strategy. Ursula will continue with the second presentation. If you see the agenda, that is based on the process of assessing learning assessment, implementation, formerly known as Data Quality Assurance Framework, DQAF, but there have been some conceptual adjustment to this, and Ursula will explain this this deeply. Well, I leave you right now with Ursula. Please, you have 45 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Attilio. So, in this presentation, I'm gonna provide an overview about the descriptive and diagnosis tools within the GAML work plan. I'll be talking about monitoring practices in the education system. I'll only briefly talk about the Catalogue of Learning Assessments, modules 1 and 2. A little bit more again about the Manual of Good Practice in Learning Assessment, and finally about the evaluation of data quality. If you're familiar with the DQAF, the Data Quality Assurance Framework concept note that's been distributed, you may notice a slight change in terminology. So the DQAF is actually now called Evaluation of Data Quality, and it might also still change in the process. And also the Manual of Good Practice in Learning Assessments, that was formerly called International Code of Best Practice in Learning Assessments. And it's now also a standalone document. And in my presentation, I will tell a little bit more about why it's now a standalone document and not directly integrated into the evaluation of data quality. Let's start with an overview about the descriptive and diagnosis tools within the GAML work plan. The focus is currently on SDG 4.1, on learning outcomes in reading and mathematics. However, the intention is to broaden the scope and to adapt the descriptive and diagnosis tools to other SDG 4 targets. The descriptive and diagnosis tools have different foci according to the different components of the work plan, and that's the documenting system-wide monitoring practices, the capacity development support, and SDG 4.1 reporting. The foci of the descriptive and diagnosis tools are ranging from a more overarching perspective on system-wide monitoring practices to improve learning outcomes, to a more specific focus on large-scale assessments that provide learning outcomes data in reading and mathematics for the purpose of the reporting. The two components with a more broader view on system-wide monitoring practices are the monitoring practices in the education system and the characteristics of learning assessments, also known as the Catalogue of Learning Assessment, the CLA. The components with a more specific view on large-scale assessments are the principles of good practice for learning assessment, which inform the evaluation of data quality. And the evaluation of data quality aims at evaluating the quality and appropriateness of large-scale assessment data that are submitted for reporting against the UAS reporting scales. The evaluation of data quality has two major components. That's the evaluation of alignment, which looks if there is adequate overlap between what the assessment tests, and the description of progression in the UIS reporting scales. And the second component of the evaluation of data quality is the evaluation of data collection, and this looks specifically if the data collection process have sufficient technical rigor. The third major component of the GAML work plan is capacity development support. Capacity development support will also be informed by both components through the monitoring practices in the education system, which leads to improvement plans to enhance monitoring practices throughout the whole education system, as well as the evaluation of data quality, which will lead to improvement plans to support countries to enhance specific large-scale assessments that they would like to use for SDG4 reporting. In my presentation, I'll be going to talk more about the documentation of system-wide monitoring practices, as well as the evaluation of data quality processes and tools. Oops, the screen is gone. I'll also try to address some of the issues that have been raised already this morning during my presentation. I hope I will succeed, but I may not succeed in not saying learning assessment, because it's really very deep-rooted, but I do acknowledge the comment, and we will consider and think about not using this term, or really just think about it. Is anybody working on the slides? Yeah, thank you.
Maybe can I explain a little bit about the changes in the terminology? Yeah, because the last meeting, the second one, we were talking about DQAF.
Mm-hmm. That's evaluation of data quality.
Yeah. You move. I mean.
I will say more about that.
If you want.
You would like to say something? No? No, that's okay. We're waiting.
It's just a recommendation for you. If you want to talk a little bit about that. Because in the agenda, you have the DQAF, data quality assurance framework, DQAF.
Thank you very much. It's back on. Okay, so the first component I'm talking about is the monitoring practices in the education system. And this component provides a framework and diagnostic tool to evaluate the strength of monitoring practices throughout the whole education system. And it also aims to identify capacity building needs for these practices with the aim to improve learning outcomes. The monitoring practices throughout the education system with a focus on learning outcomes include different assessment types such as international large-scale assessment, national large-scale assessments, household-based assessments, but also classroom-based assessments and examinations. And the different monitoring practices have different purposes. For example, large-scale assessments focus more on the system-level monitoring, whereas classroom-based assessments focus more on the institutional or actually also on the individual level. And examinations usually try to address all three of those levels. Monitoring practices also vary in the content and skills that they assess. So large-scale assessments typically focus on a learning domain, for example, reading or mathematics. And a learning domain is based on commonly acknowledged theories of learning in a relevant domain, and with a focus on the application of the skills and concepts that a student or a child has acquired. Examinations and classroom-based assessments are typically located towards the other side of this continuum and focusing more on curricular-based knowledge and skills. The focus of documenting monitoring practices of the whole education system is on the strength and breadth of the monitoring practice, the conceptual coherence and consistency of the decision-making process within this monitoring system, and finally, the use of the assessment data for evidence-based policy, but also for teaching and learning. And the third component also looks at the quality of the assessment implementation of the specific type of assessment. While the documentation of these monitoring practices is one purpose of this undertaking, the ultimate goal of collecting data on system-wide monitoring practices is to identify the needs for capacity development support and to formulate capacity development plans. The documentation of monitoring practices in the education system complements information that's being gathered by other initiatives, such as the World Bank's SABER, for example. In relation to such other initiatives, the documentation of monitoring practices combines the following features. So it takes a system-wide approach. It focuses on the characteristics of the assessment components and how they interact. It covers, and for this component, it is intended that the documentation will draw on data from other initiatives such as World Bank SABER, but hopefully also on data from PISA for Development's capacity needs analysis, or of course the UIS Catalogue of Learning Assessment Module 1, which also already collects data for some of these assessment components. What are the next steps for this component? So first, the conceptual framework needs to be a bit more further developed. The evaluation components need to be described in detail, and as well as the overarching processes. Data sources need to be identified and data collection tools developed or also identified. And the uses of the documentation and data collected need to be described, and timeline and resources need to be decided upon as well. So it would be good to install a review process to accompany the development of this particular component of the diagnosis and documentation instruments. The second component on the slide are the characteristics of learning assessments, also known as the Catalogue of Learning Assessments, or a CLA. The Catalogue is a simple tool to compile standardized and comparable information on national, regional, and international learning assessments, including school-based and household-based assessments, and targeting early childhood, primary, and secondary levels of education. And here it's really important to mention the inclusion of household-based assessments in this version of the CLA, because household-based assessments also cover citizen-led assessments, or in particular any other household survey that have an assessment component. And this enables us to gather data from students or children or youth that are actually not enrolled in school or not attending school. And this is a really important component of data collection as well. With CLA Module 1, a new questionnaire was released. And the core of the questionnaire are just general questions about each of the assessments a country lists. So for example, the organization that's responsible for the assessment, the purpose of this assessment, the background data and cognitive domains that are collected with the assessment, the target population, sampling and administration, information about data analysis and dissemination and reporting. And you can access the questionnaire on the UIS website. The intention of the information collected with this module is to help to understand the current state of learning assessment programs or activities around the world. And as such, the documentation will also serve as a resource for countries that are interested in developing a national assessment, or they plan to improve their existing assessment or want to take part in an international or regional assessment. The data collected with the module will also inform the related components, for example, the documentation of monitoring practices I was talking about beforehand, and as well as the evaluation of data quality, of which I will speak later on. And also, other data collection elements might be added at a later stage to deal with additional SDG 4 targets, because the current focus is largely on SDG 4.1. CLA Module 2 is intended to be an instrument or a suite of instruments that will be used to collect and document the learning outcomes data for reporting against the SDG 4 targets, and taking into account all the different targets of SDG 4. This undertaking is very complex, and still further thinking needs to be done to develop a tool that meets all the needs of such a complex data structure. And with this purpose, this instrument is already part of the tools that have more specific focus on large-scale assessments, which brings us directly to the GPLA. So the GPLA is the Manual of Good Practice in Learning Assessment, which was formerly called the International Code of Good Practice in Learning Assessment. So it's just a slight change in the terminology. The GPLA has various purposes. First, it is an independent articulation of good practices in large-scale assessments of learning. And as such, the GPLA can also be used by countries to develop and implement robust assessment programs of good quality, irrespective if countries decide to submit their data for SDG 4 reporting or not. So it's really also intended as an independent articulation of these good practices. As an independent articulation of good practices in large-scale assessments, it provides the conceptual framework to underpin the evaluation of data quality of large-scale assessments that are used to provide data for SDG 4 reporting. So, for example, for the evaluation of alignment and the evaluation of data collection. The GPLA also serves as a conceptual framework to underpin the diagnosis of country-level capacity and capacity development plans for large-scale assessments as part of the documentation of monitoring practices in the education system that I was talking earlier on. The Manual of Good Practices has 4 broad sections about background, quality context, key quality concepts, and good practices. Background covers mainly the context of the SDG 4 reporting and the purposes of the GPLA. The third area, key quality concepts for learning assessments, talks about 5 cross-cutting quality principles for large-scale assessments. That is clarity and consistency of purpose, objectivity and independence, transparency and accountability, technical rigor and ethicality and fairness. And I'll talk about those briefly as well. Last but not least, the 4th section, the good practice and learning assessment, describes the 14 key areas of a robust assessment program that will form the operational core of the manual, as well as later on the evaluation of data quality processes. Just briefly about the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics. The principles define professional and scientific standards for the generation of official statistics across all aspects of governance, and there are 10 altogether, and they're listed on this slide, and there is also the link provided if you are interested and would like to look it up. The principles aim to help nations to improve and build their processes and capacity in planning, collecting, and disseminating statistics in order to inform evidence-based decision-making. And the GPLA has very similar aims to these, just related to large-scale assessments. The GPLA interacts with the fundamental principles on 2 levels. First, the GPLA itself aims to adhere to these principles. And secondly, the principles are operationalized in the manual in the context of large-scale assessments. Here is a brief example for operationalization on Principle 5 on data sources. The second overarching quality concept is that of fitness for purpose, and I think this concept will be really important in the context of the evaluation of data quality, for example, also concerning issues that Saeed raised today with the question whether STEP data should be acknowledged and reported or not, for example. So, in general, fitness for purpose describes the concept that the ultimate goal of learning assessment is to generate data that are appropriate for their designated purpose. And in the global context of SDG 4 monitoring, this is more concerned with the appropriateness of the data for the purposes of international reporting on learning outcomes. And it aims to strike a balance between technical rigor and the practical implications of using and comparing data from a variety of existing learning assessments. And one response to this fitness of purpose concept has been the development of the UIS reporting scales itself to map and compare learning outcomes from different assessments. Fitness for purpose is therefore a concept that concerns all accompanying guidelines and processes that are going to be installed for the SDG 4 reporting. For example, the GPLA is part of the support mechanism to help countries generate fit-for-purpose data for SDG 4 learning outcomes targets. The screen has gone again, please. But the concept also helps countries to achieve technical rigor while allowing the flexibility to set their own assessment priorities within national contexts. And this is an issue that has also already been raised today, that it's important to include national assessments and see that they're relevant at the national level, but make them see that they're robust enough to be used for SDG 4 monitoring. And the evaluation of data quality processes will ensure that data provided are fit for the purpose of reporting the outcome data against the UAS reporting scales. I'll also talk about the broader quality context, or the 5 quality concepts that cut across all the areas of a robust assessment program. So these were clarity and consistency of purpose, objectivity and independence, transparency and accountability, technical rigor, and ethicality and fairness. So clarity and consistency of purpose addresses the importance of clearly defining the purposes of an assessment program and to maintain the consistency across all the areas of an assessment, which means, for example, that all decisions about the program should be consistent with the stated purposes in order to ensure that the final results will be valuable and useful as well. Objectivity and independence raises the claim that the assessment provides an unbiased, value-free measure of education quality or the learning outcomes and contextual information respectively, as well as their interpretation. So that's particularly important for reporting and dissemination of findings as well. Related to this point are concerns about transparency and accountability that addresses the need to ensure that assessments use resources efficiently and are technically robust and consistent with their intended purposes, and also open to external scrutiny. That's also an important point. Technical rigor is also very important, and it's about applying scientific principles in all areas of assessment, but it addresses technical quality criteria, for example, reliability and validity of the measures, but it also addresses other areas such as sampling methodology or test design or quality assurance during field operations. So it's really essential to put quality assurance mechanism in place to ensure technical rigor at all stages of an assessment program. The 5th point, ethicality and fairness, is to ensure that no harm is done to individuals or groups as a result of an assessment program. And considerations in this regard are, for example, confidentiality and well-being of the participants, but also discrimination and inclusiveness of the assessment. The 4th section of the Manual of Good Practice in Learning Assessment is the operational core of the manual, and it describes the 14 key areas of a robust assessment program that are illustrated in this graphic. The key areas can also be viewed as the life cycle of an assessment program, and they range from identifying and defining the policy goals and education issues that the assessment wants to address, to designing and implementing the assessment in coherence with these goals and purposes, through to the analysis and reporting of the data to inform the initially defined policy goals and education issues. For each key area, the manual first provides an objective or product, and then it describes how to achieve these objectives and products considering high quality standards or good practice and learning assessments. And I'll provide just one example from one key area, that's key area 5. It refers to developing high quality cognitive instruments. First, the objective or product is stated, and it says cognitive instruments containing items with proven reliability, validity, and fairness with regard to the populations of interest. Following this statement is a breakdown and further explanation of the different components of the objective. So about cognitive instruments, what means proven reliability, validity, and fairness, and what do we mean by the populations of interest. Following these definitions and explanations, it's then described how the objective can be achieved through good practices and processes. In this example about developing high-quality test items, for example, it's about establishing a team of test developers, what is important to consider for this, how to write a scoring guide, for example, and principles, good practice principles on how to write good high-quality test items, for example. What do test items consist of, or what kind of response formats can they have, and what response formats are used for particular skills and knowledge to assess, for example. For each key area, it's also intended to include an actual example of good practice from an existing assessment program for better understanding and illustration of the key area. What are the next steps? So the Manual of Good Practice of Learning Assessment is already well developed, and the first draft has been shared for review through the Assessment Implementation Task Force. And we would like to respond to the task force review and finalize it, and then make it available to the broader GAML for a second review and then finalize it. So that's already a set of very clear next steps for one product. The final component of the descriptive and diagnosis tools in this presentation is the evaluation of data quality. So let's go back to where it's situated in the GAML work plan for SDG 4. Of course, it sits under SDG 4.1 reporting. Let's look at the evaluation of data quality in greater detail. So, as I've mentioned before, the evaluation itself is underpinned by the principles of good practice that are described in the GPLA. And the evaluation has two major components, the evaluation of alignment and the evaluation of data collection. The evaluation of alignment looks if there is an adequate overlap between what the assessment of the participating country tests and the description of the progression in the UIS reporting scale. The evaluation is intended to be a collaborative undertaking between the participating country and the facilitating organization. The core of the alignment evaluation are the cognitive instruments of an assessment program that includes assessment frameworks, test blueprints, sample items, and as well describe proficiency scales if there are any. And the alignment will be evaluated at 3 layers of the UIS reporting scale. So it will look at the domain, at the strengths, and at the levels. And I think that will become a lot clearer in Janine's presentation in session 5 this afternoon. If the evaluation of alignment determines that there is an adequate overlap between what the assessment tests and the content of the UIS reporting scales, then the country assessment will proceed to the next step, the evaluation of data collection. But if the evaluation would show that the overlap is not adequate, then the country will be supported via an improvement plan to increase the overlap with the US reporting scales for the purpose of the reporting. The second component of the evaluation of data quality looks at the data collection and specifically the technical rigor of the data collection process. This evaluation is also intended to be a collaborative undertaking between the participating country and the facilitating organization. And the core of this evaluation are the methods and products from the data collection, for example, technical reports, operational manuals, the database, and also results reports. And methods of the evaluation will comprise desk reviews of those reports or of the database. It may comprise questionnaires and interviews and also in-country visits. Tools will be, for example, checklists or questionnaires or interview guidelines or report templates. And again, if the evaluation of data collection is successful and shows that the data collection has satisfying technical rigor, then the assessment will proceed to an empirical linking step. However, if the evaluation shows that the technical rigor of the data collection is not satisfying, then the country will be supported by an agreed improvement plan with the aim to strengthen the technical rigor of the data collection. So the whole process of the evaluation of data quality is described in the DQAF concept note. So the processes are still the same, although the terminology has changed. Okay, that's good because I'm just finishing off with the major issues for consideration for the evaluation of data quality. So it will be undertaken in partnership of a participating country and a facilitating organization. And questions are, who will be responsible as the facilitating organization, and how best to achieve country involvement and to encourage countries or to undergo these evaluation processes with one of their assessments. The second major issues for consideration concern that all processes need to be transparent and reproducible and consistently applied and documented. And so we need governance protocols that include procedures to audit decision-making and to resolve disputes or adjudicate decisions made following the evaluation. So these are all really very difficult decisions to make, and who will have the oversight of the evaluation of data quality and over these decisions. Okay, and just my last slide, which is gone, unfortunately. There it is. Is it this one? Yeah, okay. So the principles of good practice in learning assessment need to be operationalized for the purpose of the evaluation of the data quality, and standards need to be defined and set for this evaluation. And it's the question, who will define these standards, and also how can the concept of fitness for purpose be best applied when these standards are formulated or evaluated. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ursula, for this clear and interesting presentation. Just would like to say, from our point of view, from our work at the regional level, I think it's very important to work in these tools very closely, to know more about these developments, because this tool could be very useful for our work in the field. For example, for promotion collaboration among countries to know what some countries are doing within the region, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, where the difference among countries are huge. Talking about learning assessment. And I think it's very important to for example, to update data and also for the dissemination of this kind of tools. And so I think I don't know, Sylvia. I think we have like 20 minutes for questions and answers, and so the floor is open. Please use the microphone.
First of all, I love the idea of a comprehensive learning assessment tool that looks at different levels of assessment all at one time. I love that idea. My issue is that at different levels of assessment, you're going to have different interpretations of achievement. And I'll give you an example, a definite example of this. If you look at the gender and mathematics achievement results, for the last over 100 years, males have consistently outperformed females in achievement studies. It's a small but demonstrable difference in achievement, and it's unquestionable. It's been there for over 100 years. A new study that in 2014 came out where achievement was defined, instead of using large-scale assessment results, they used classroom-based results, and they found the reverse, that females slightly outperform males over the period of time. So what it tells me is that if you're looking at achievement at a classroom level thing, then achievement may be defined differently. And if it's defined differently, it muddies what this tool is attempting to do. So could you include something like a question at the questionnaire level where a jurisdiction would have to indicate how they're coming about defining their achievement? I mean, that would seem reasonable to me.
Thank you. Other comment or questions? No? Ah, there is.
Oh, thank you for your great presentation. I have no question, just a comment and remark. And I want to share my own experiences of the first UN World Data Forum for SDG in Cape Town this year, and there were ongoing discussions over how to make a good balance between international standardization and national context, as we discussed a lot. And there is a very brand new term, the data ecosystem, so which means that which allows to have many different approaches and perspectives as she present, and also the as it's like to have the different stakeholders from international organizations to civil society at the very local level in very bottom approaches to collect the SDG data. And indeed, and there is a kind of the discussions about the more normative areas, like education, learning, and cultures would have more room and the flexibility to reflect on the real context, the real life. Yeah, in the data collection and analysis. So I hope our GAML could be get along with such a trend, and then could be a very good practice in the much broader scope of the SDG. So that's my comment and reflection, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Is this on? Thank you for a great presentation. I have questions, two questions. One is around equity, and I was wondering if you could speak to the extent that equity is addressed in both the CLA questionnaires, if you collect data on the background populations, if that includes dimensions of equity, and secondly, on GPLA, if there's principles or recommendations around strengthening data collected on the populations that are being assessed so that equity analysis can be performed first, and then secondly, the considerations that would have to be taken into account around sampling and analysis to be able to actually do it. So they're just questions for clarification of whether or not that's included. And secondly, I want to, and I'm sure others have questions about this because we talked about this at break, but all of this capacity building and improvement, where you have a decision tree that leads to a no, and then there's a process for capacity building and strengthening and improvement. So what's the thinking around how that's going to take place and where there'll be a reassessment and support and who would be providing it? Thank you.
Thank you. This is start with these 3 ones.
Yeah. Okay, so I would also like to invite others to respond. Feel free to contribute as well. So to the first comment about the monitoring practices of the education system and the different assessment components produce different achievement or student achievement, or is different or different view on student achievement, like for example gender differences may act differently over different assessment components. So I really would like to emphasize here the idea that is why we would like, or that is why we think it is really important to look at all elements of an education system's monitoring practices to include the assessments that have really different purposes. And it is the purpose of a national assessment, for example, to say something about a whole student population, whereas a classroom assessment really says something about this one particular classroom. And it may as well happen that those findings do not align, because this is a very specific part of the population in comparison to the overall sample or population. So I think that is just one more reason to emphasize why it is important to look at all those different components in the monitoring system. The second question was on equity and whether it's included in the Catalogue of Learning Assessment Instruments 1 and 2. So the Catalogue of Learning Assessment Module 1 is a tool to assess contextual information about this assessment, and there are questions about the background information that are being collected with this assessment. And if a country collects data about equity, then they would indicate it in this section of this module. However, it's a really very good consideration that it should probably be included in Module 2 as an outcome by itself as well. So thanks for the very good consideration. And then we had...
Sorry, also equity within the GPLA principles?
In the
If you could
GPLA.
just comment on that.
Yeah, so that's definitely included. It's included in the overall concept that talks about inclusiveness of assessments, and it's also addressed in the target population and sampling section, where it talks more specifically about to address all these considerations beforehand and to consider, while you define your target population, that you might knowingly or not knowingly exclude parts of the population that would not be able to participate in the assessment. For example, this could be if a country has various languages and students are only assessed in one language, for example. It could include students with impairment, for example, students that would need visual aids for completing the assessment. So inclusiveness is a very broad concept, and probably also here applies the concept of fit for purpose. So the target population needs to be defined considering the purpose of the assessment, and then it must be made sure that this is consistent and makes sense to produce usable data after all. And the third question about capacity building, so I would quite like to hand it on to someone else who is a bit more involved in these processes of developing capacity development improvement plans and diagnostic tools.
Janine, you want to say something? No?
No, I just want to take over as involved in these kind of issues. about capacity development and how to improve the tools. We have already had conversation with some of you here in the room about how to walk this part of the developing of this tool towards some of the implementation part of some of these tools. And I think that in that sense is also something that is connected to the presentation of David in the morning, is the fact that these tools are not the only ones available, and for this reason an inventory of tools has been suggested to many of the chairs of the different task forces as some part of the outputs that we think that we should actually aspire to have. But this translation in terms of this capacity development should be part of the issues that we think that deserve to have a kind of a task force as well, working and making recommendations on how to walk that process. And obviously there are many organizations that could help. UIS is in this moment involved in a specific project that actually is trying to implement using all the different sources of data and having a broader kind of approach and being part of a broader initiative about capacity development. But at the same time, we know that this is not the only approach that is available. So I think that as part of the work of the task force as well is needed a kind of a review of the different experiences that are in terms of capacity development and how you walk from these tools that are resources that are available to how you work and streamline into policy making and make these resources more kind of known and understandable and being part of a learning data plan or a learning strategy for data. So I think that this is a part of the work that we see that we need to do. So I think
Thanks. We have time for 3 questions more. So there. So we have 4. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Is it on? I thought your presentation was very interesting, gave a very clear and systematic view of how national assessment systems could be reviewed and their alignment with good practices identified, and then leading to what I presume would be very useful, practical plans for helping the country improve its system. But I'd like to get my head around sort of concretely what it means. I mean, how long do you think it would take to do that kind of diagnostic in a typical country, and how much would it cost? And how can we relate that a little bit to the work that the World Bank's been doing with the SABER instrument on assessment, which, as I see it, is a little more simple and general in what it tries to cover than what you're proposing. But I'd just like to see how you guys see the links, because what we don't need is multiple groups going to the countries and kind of asking the same questions and reviewing the same things. And maybe Marguerite could comment on that as well.
There's another question on that side. No? This side? Okay.
Hi, thank you for a very clear presentation. I have 2 short questions. One is you gave the link, and thanks to the technology here, I was able to hop onto the internet and actually look on the database and quickly download what's there. And so, I have a list now of the 69 countries, what kind of assessments they have, and in which grades and which subjects they're being assessed. It's quite impressive. But then, of course, you always think of the next thing. And what what is not here is any of the regional and internet countries that have done, some countries are there with multiple assessments, like Cambodia's in there 4 times because they do 4 different kinds of things. Is there a plan to include also the regional and international assessments, or things like ACER, which are so that's one question. And the other, it relates a little bit, is so now we have an overview of what assessments are being done in which countries and which subjects. What is the sort of the timing for the plan to come out with the alignment? Because that's actually where we're getting to. I mean, just having a list of the assessments doesn't tell us what these children are learning. How long will it take to get to where we have aligned results that the countries can report?
Thank you. We have one question.
Yeah, I have I think 3 observations. One on the capacity and the capacity building. Our experience difference between capacity of high-income countries and middle-income countries. There's not much difference.
Michael, could you, microphone?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that, you hear me now? I was just saying that in our experience, the capacity to implement large-scale assessments, there is not very much difference in capacity between high-income and middle-income countries. We don't see very much difference in capacity levels. Where we do see a big difference is as you descend towards lower middle income and then low income, then you really are faced with quite significant capacity limitations, both in terms of capacity to implement, but also the institutional arrangements for assessment as well. So if you are looking at the low-income countries, as we are, the resources necessary to build capacity in those countries is humongous. I mean, I can't even guess at what kind of resources are going to be needed. And it isn't just training and drilling people on procedures, it's the institutions themselves and their relationships to schools, it's everything. So that for me is a really big issue. Then looking at the steps you've outlined for processing data, you are going to be faced with maybe 100 countries over the next 5, 6, 7 years. You cannot accept their data. It just does not meet anything like a necessary level of quality. So there will be a tension between inclusiveness and maintaining quality standards for data. And I think we have to think through how you manage that, how you keep encouraging countries to keep improving while still maintaining the quality gateway. And then I thought that middle question you got there, who will define these standards? I think this touches on the governance things that we've been talked about before. And so the relationship between the Global Alliance to Monitor Learning and the TCG, and what is the TCG delegating to the Global Alliance in terms of decision making, and then upwards, what is the steering committee delegating to the TCG in terms of decision making? It's not very clear yet what that is.
Okay. I think there was someone else who raised the hand in this side. No? So there is another one there.
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. No, thank you for the presentation. It was really useful to see the progress that's being made. I have 4 questions, but they're mostly quite practical and hopefully quite quick. The first is on the Catalogue for Learning Assessment. I mean, what will be critical is how it's updated and how comprehensive it is. So it'd be useful to hear, what your thinking is on that process. And there's presumably a balance between how simple it is and how easy it is to keep, how comprehensive it is and how easy it is to keep up to date. And secondly, for the good practice manual, I think it'll be really important that it's reviewed properly by the countries and the organisations that are likely to be using it. I was just a bit concerned by the consultation process set out there, which was around the GAML process, that there won't be enough consultation with countries, and I would sort of encourage you to use maybe the TCG process to make sure you've got that buy-in at the start. Thirdly, I just wondered if you can say a little bit more about how you're going to develop the plan for the empirical linking. It's obviously an important part of the process, but you didn't talk a lot about it in the presentation. And finally, just a comment that presumably this is all optional for countries. This is a tool that countries can use for aligning any particular assessment with the global standards if they choose to. And I think it's just important that it's presented in that way as an optional choice, and not given any kind of impression that the hope is that all assessments will become aligned to this global framework, because presumably that's not the case. This is about providing the tools for countries to do this with assessments if they want to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of the learning assessment, the first catalog. I mean, the information that is there is information from the first version of the catalog. The catalog has been actually funded by specific donors, that the GPE and the Hewlett Foundation as part of that effort. It was focused on a set of countries that are the sub-Saharan countries. Actually, this was the focus. There has been included some other countries outside the original focus of the catalog. Mainly, we have worked with the laboratory of UNESCO in the office in Santiago, that they have provided more information. The first version of the catalog was really very deep in terms of the question they were asking and a lot of details. And obviously, when you have this and get into a lot of details, you lose in terms of rate of responses, so it was actually very low in some of the cases. So this was part of the information, so we tried to clip and to keep and to clean some part of the information we got. Then we went over the process of what we're going to be asking in this second round of the catalog, trying to keep obviously the questions that are the key questions of that we think that describe in a good way what's happening and the broader issues that could actually provide, even if you want some live version of some dimension of what's happening there. You could see and you can judge quality by asking how did you sample, for instance, and some other questions that are in the catalog. That obviously, eventually, for some of the other targets, might be needing to actually to have some review. But basically, the process has been actually fed information from the first version of the catalog, from some of the difficulties in collecting that data, and actually asking ourselves to some extent why we want to have such a depth of data, with actually we're sacrificing to some extent even the response to the questionnaire. So we actually try to keep to something that was actually much more simpler to some extent, but still kept the main dimensions actually asking in terms of that. In terms of the empirical work, though, obviously assessment in general don't happen on an annual basis in most of the countries. In some of them it happens, but it don't happen. So it's something that we are actually in the second part of the implementation, in second part of the year. So it's going to be some kind of piloting of this first module of the catalog. The second module is underway, and it's about the data collection and obviously the reporting for SDG 4 and all the requirement in terms of disaggregation that SDG 4 is also asking. So we're going to be piloting this, and I have a kind of a methodology of updating that we're trying to set into place, but actually we think that an annual update about what are the new assessments. So you are not having regional assessment and international assessment because these databases are actually along with many databases. Actually, we have our own as well, but these are in general public in the sites of the organization who are administering the assessment. We have our centralized database. So this is to some extent easy to be pulled from there and actually to build, but the idea of the catalog was mainly about collecting this information about more national sources. So this is more or less on the empirical side about some of the issues that are around the data collection, but the idea is to try to implement. Actually, we have 3 countries for sure that are going to be piloting in the second semester that are associated to one of the projects that were involved in terms of that. And then in capacity development, I couldn't agree more with Michael in some of the comments that he has made. So we have been part of coming from developing regions. We have been in the challenge of actually adapting and implementing large-scale assessment, and we know all these dimensions, but I think that some of the tools that we think that are synergic in this consideration, that are the SABRE from the World Bank that look at the institutional part and some other aspect, plus the ones that we want to add to this spectrum, are going to be providing some kind of a reading of these institutional challenges and some even the capacity to adapt and the knowledge capacity in the countries for this transference of knowledge beyond the funding. No?
Okay. Thank you very much for all your questions and comments. They're really helpful also to further develop the tools and processes that we are currently developing, like the evaluation of data quality and the review process for the GPLA. So that's really very important comments, and I would like to thank you. There were 2 questions about the timings of how long will the alignment take and what does it mean for a country and how long does it take and how much does it cost. So I would be very lucky to be able to answer these questions already. So this process is still in developing, and the next step on ACER-GEM side, for example, is to conceptualize a few alignment studies in the beginning and to see to be able to respond to those questions and to all those other technical matters that it comprises as well. So I hope at the next GAML meeting I will be able to provide a little bit more response about that as well. Yeah, so there was the question about the monitoring of education systems documentation and how it relates to SABER. So we have developed an overview table that clearly describes the content of SABER and the content that we would see in this documentation process, but I can't tell you at the top of my head, but I'm happy to share this table with you following the meeting and to send it around for consideration as well. Then there was a question about the specifics of the empirical linking, and I would like to keep this question for session 5 because this will go through the UIS reporting scale, and I think it will become a lot clearer what we mean by linking and how such an empirical linking might work. Were there any questions that I missed?
Well, we are on time right now, so right now we have the lunch break, so we have the opportunity to continue talking about these issues, and I would like to thank our speaker again for her very interesting and clear presentation, and thanks for the participant for the question too. And please enjoy your meal and see you later for the sessions in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. I know this session is taking a bit longer because we have a longer tea break. So could we have lunch for 45 minutes and come back at 1:45? So, okay. And a second thing is the change of agenda because one of our presenters is sick today. So session 6 will be moved to tomorrow morning. And what will replace today will be the breakup groups of the task force. Okay, and the INEE has kindly accommodated us, so they have created a few rooms